Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. As always, thank you so much for being here. I hope you're doing awesome. I know that's a big ask, right? For everything that's going on in the world right now. For those of you who listen to this many months later, this is being recorded during the COVID pandemic. So we have been in lockdown for, I think in the US, we're going on our 4th or 5th week. I don't know, I've lost track of time at this point. So I hope you're holding up. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're making the most of it. I will tell you, for me personally, I just happen to have a lot of irons in the fire for my business at this time of the year. We have a lot of projects we're working on right now. And so that's really kept me very consumed. But of course, at the same time, I'm homeschooling a 10-year-old. So that's been interesting. God bless the teachers is all I have to say. I am not excellent at homeschooling my child, but we're getting through it and we're learning a lot about each other and about ourselves. And I am definitely using so many of the tools that I talk about on this podcast to stay straight with myself. Because like you, I have a lot of emotions coming up. It's easy for me to move into the space of overwhelm if I'm not careful. So I just want to remind you that the things I talk about on this podcast are things that I use every day in my own life, especially at a time like this. So one of the things that we are working on right now inside of Grace and Grit that I'm really excited about, and I really hope you'll participate in, is we have the Confident Women Rising Summit beginning on Monday, April 20th. Now, I know some of you are going to be listening to this, months down the road, so you're going to miss the event, but there's 2 ways that you can participate. So first of all, to participate in any option, you have to go to confidentwomenrising.com to get yourself registered. There is a free version of this event that will run from April 20th to April 25th. It will be held inside of a Facebook group. So once you're registered, you'll get invited into that group. And every day I have 4 interviews with incredible thought leaders within the space of women's health that I've done these interviews with. They're full of insight, full of strategies, and incredible information about how to boost your confidence, specifically in the area of health. We'll drop about 4 episodes a day of these interviews over the course of 5 days. And they'll be available for you to watch for about 24 hours, and then they disappear. Now, if that doesn't work for you, if you don't like Facebook, you would rather have more than 24 hours to view the videos, or you're listening to this many months later, I just want you to know that you can also still go to Confident Women Rising and purchase what we call a Backstage Pass. It's $34, which I think is a screaming deal. If you're listening to this months later, it's going to be higher than that. I think the price point is $94. But for those of you who are actually considering this before the event begins, the price right now is $34, and it gives you access to all of the videos, all of the audio, all of the bonuses on the 20th. So you'll get access to a vault of information that you can peruse through at your own convenience. This project has been on my heart for a really long time. I feel so good about the content that we are pushing out through this event. And the reason I was inspired to do the event is because I have been in the space of women's health now for 20 years. It's literally been the only career I've ever known. And while women come into the space to pursue a lot of different goals, they want to lose weight, they want to feel better, they want to gain strength, they want to improve their sleep. What women ultimately want on the other side of achieving anything is more confidence. And I have seen this play out time and time again. So when I reached out to these other professionals that I've had the awesome privilege of working with and getting to know over the years, I wanted them all to bring their perspective on confidence to the table. And so we're talking about all things women's health, specifically things that there's a lot of shame around for women. So we're talking about mental health. We're talking about pelvic health. We're talking about a lot of the things we talk about on this podcast, physical health, of course, and even financial health. A lot of talk about hormones. So if that sounds appealing to you, get yourself over to Confident Women Rising and get yourself registered, because again, this event starts very soon and I would hate for you to miss it. So for today's episode, I really wanted to make sure that I was addressing the concerns of the people in my community, especially because life is just looking very different for, I think, all of us right now. So I reached out and just asked people what their questions were. And I got some great questions. I chose 4 of them that I'm going to address on the podcast today. And I'm just going to kind of do it rapid fire style. So I'm going to read you the question. I'm going to give you my down and dirty answer. And then I'm going to move on to the next question. And I hope this is helpful to you, because I think when other people ask questions, it helps to normalize topics for us. Like, oh, I'm not the only one who feels this way. That's awesome. So I hope there's that. And usually when one person has the question, lots of people have the question. So I hope this is of value to you. So question number 1 is this. Prior to lockdown, I had freed myself from sugar, but now I'm struggling again with it. I'm coming up with excuse after excuse as to why I should have it. Like, I exercise today, so one little bit of it won't hurt, but I know it will, because I won't just have a little bit. I also say to myself, it's healthy junk food, so it'll be okay, but I know it ultimately won't. So what, if any, habits should I focus on for getting myself back on track? Okay, so first and foremost, it makes total sense that old habits are rearing their ugly heads right now. All right. So things that you have been working on improving for the last several months or maybe several years might not feel so easy to engage with right now, right? So again, old habits often show up in times of stress. And of course, we're definitely in a time of more stress. And I want you to remember why it's easy for old habits to return right now. A habit is a reaction to a need that you have practiced so many times. You do it automatically without having to think. So literally, a habit is your brain's way of conserving energy. And right now, your brain is freaking out a little bit because it's under more stress, specifically your lizard brain, right? I talk about the lizard brain a lot. It's the oldest part of our brain that is really concerned about 3 things: seeking out pleasure, avoiding pain, and exerting the least amount of effort. And your lizard brain pretty much sees everything in life as a threat because its primary concern is your survival. So right now, your lizard brain has a lot of material to work with to create a very big dramatic story about all the reasons why it should be freaking out. And when we're in that state and we're not parenting that part of our brain, right? We're not kind of giving it a pep talk that it doesn't need to freak out to such an extent. You're going to feel very compelled to do things that don't serve you. Old habits are going to rear their ugly heads. You're going to be tempted to eat sugar, like in this case, where you were able to give it up, and you were feeling like you were doing well with it. Some of you who've stopped smoking might feel like smoking again. If, whatever your food is, your vice is, it's probably a lot more tempting right now for the reason that your brain has practiced that pattern for so long. I mean, come on, how long have some of your bad habits been with you? Decades, right? So even though you've been working on improving that habit for a few months, a few years, it's not nearly as much practice as you had with the old habit. So it makes a lot of sense that the old habit would come out of its lair at a time like this. So I think that's really important to remember in order for you to extend yourself a little compassion. That's what's going on. That is actually the kind of the biology of it. There's nothing wrong with you. Your brain is just doing what it's built to do. The other thing I want to remind you of is there's a lot of emotion showing up right now for people, right? We're spending more time alone. Where many people are less busy or they're more busy, right? I definitely work with both camps of women. There's a little bit of everything right now. But when we start feeling emotions like more stress, more frustration, more fear about the future, it's really easy to buffer. And remember what buffering is. Buffering is reaching for anything outside of ourselves to change our internal landscape, right? So it's basically things that make us feel anything but the emotion we're currently experiencing. So we can buffer with sugar, we can buffer with alcohol, we can buffer with Netflix, we can buffer with work, we can buffer with focusing on other people's problems. You can buffer with pretty much anything. In this case, I hear that potentially you're buffering with sugar. So here are the solutions that I think are most helpful right now. Number one, get rid of the sugar, right? No matter what healthy sugar you have in the house, it sounds like you're in a place where you're not managing it well. And I know who this person is, and I also know that she has several children, so I know that can be a little bit tricky. But seriously, you owe it to yourself to pad your environment. So if the sugar is a problem, remove the sugar. Because it's not adding nutritional benefit to your life right now. And if you really feel like sugar is leading the dance rather than you, removing it from your environment is single-handedly one of the most powerful things you can do. The second thing I would say is make sure you're getting enough rest. Times of higher stress demand that we honor our body and brain with more restoration, not less. And so give yourself permission to rest more. Because if you're underslept and you're underrested in general, you're not going to be in a position to feel like you have a lot of control to manage your mind when you need to manage your mind. So definitely, I would say sleep and rest is a really big anchor right now. Get really curious about the emotions that are coming up for you, right? Because underneath that urge to have sugar, there is emotion that you are unwilling to feel. Maybe you're just not willing to feel uncomfortable with not eating sugar. But maybe you're eating sugar because you're so stressed out and you're unwilling to feel stressed out. Because we kid ourselves, right? That the sugar is actually going to make me feel less stressed. And sure, it feels that way for a few minutes. But ultimately, it makes us more stressed. Physiologically and psychologically. So get curious about your emotional landscape and start allowing yourself to feel your emotions rather than eating your emotions. And the only way that I know how to do that is to take responsibility for your thinking, right? You have a lot of thoughts right now that are not serving you. I deserve it. It's just a little bit. It's healthy junk food. All of those thoughts are going to create evidence for themselves. So you're going to find lots of reasons why you deserve it. When you tell yourself it's just a little bit, you're not going to be tempted not to eat it. You're not going to allow the urge. Telling yourself it's just a little bit is almost an invitation. It is an invitation to just do the thing. It's healthy junk food. To me, that's just a funny statement, right? And I'm sure you see the humor in that. But it's an oxymoron. Healthy junk food. It's just not a thing. But by you putting the label healthy, it's almost like you're giving yourself permission because you're deeming it healthy, even though simultaneously you know it isn't working for your body, which is why you call it junk food. So when we can start really thinking about our thinking, it's powerful because your thinking drives your emotions. in many cases, right? Your emotions drive your actions, and your actions create your results. So get very curious about what you're thinking and what you're feeling. Get enough sleep, get rid of the sugar. All right, question number 2. I'm feeling really guilty right now about everything my friends and family are going through because of COVID. I've spent most of my life motivated by guilt, and it turns me into a total workaholic, which I know isn't helping because it's taking so much attention off other things I care about. This is a fascinating question, right? Because what I hear is that this person is motivated by guilt, which totally sucks, by the way, right? Being motivated by guilt, it feels terrible. And here's the truth of it. I don't actually think that you're motivated by guilt. I think that you're feeling guilt because of something you're thinking, and you're buffering with work. So what do I mean by that? I mean, you have thoughts that are generating this emotion of guilt. And then you're throwing yourself into work, which from the outside looks super productive and awesome, right? It looks like you're motivated. When in truth, what you're doing is you're working so much to avoid feeling guilty. Now, please don't hear me saying I think you should feel guilty, because I don't even know what you feel guilty about. But it sounds like you're feeling guilty for things you can't even control, which is what your friends and family are going through because of COVID, right? So I want to remind all of you that only you know why you do what you do. So this person is throwing herself into work, which again, to the outside world looks super productive, right? Looks like an awesome thing. But she knows why she's doing it. It's not coming from a healthy place. And it definitely sounds like in her question, she knows her reasons. And so if you know it's not coming from a healthy place, then you need to reconsider how you're thinking, how you're feeling, and what you're doing. All right, so guilt for many people is a habit. And it sounds to me for this person like it's definitely a habit, because she says, I've spent most of my life being motivated by guilt. That to me speaks to a pattern that she's had most of her life. So get clear on what you are feeling guilty about specifically, which is going to be a whole lot of thoughts. And so I talk about the thought download or the brain dump all the time, which is putting pen to page and literally write about what you feel guilty about. What a thought download does is it allows you to start thinking about your own thinking. And I know a lot of you keep convincing yourself that you can do this in your head, but you really can't. When you see things on paper, you see it in a completely different way than if you never get it out of your brain. So to the person who asked this question, I bet there is a lot you are feeling guilty about that you have zero control over. And that is in no way helpful to you. It's doing is creating a lot of unnecessary struggle in your life. You are focusing so much on what you can't control, right? So you feeling guilty assumes that you do have control over what your friends and family are going through, but you do not. You don't have control over other people's lives. You have control over your life. But you're focusing so much on the things that you can't control, in this case, other people's situations, that you aren't showing up for the things that you can control, at least not to the degree that you want to, right? Because what I heard in the question is that it's taking so much attention off other things that I care about. So this, again, is why we need to put pen to page, get clear on why we're feeling so guilty, ask ourselves if I actually really have control over those things, which I think you're going to see very quickly that you do not, because then that allows you an invitation to change your thinking. That's a whole nother episode, which I've done lots of, by the way. There's lots of podcasts on this that I've already done, but I'm going to leave it at that. Question 3. I had a great routine before going into COVID. I felt like I was really getting traction. But now the rug has been pulled out from underneath me, and I feel like I'm starting from scratch. How do I get traction again? First of all, drop the thought that you are starting from scratch. Why? Because when you tell yourself that you have to start something over, isn't that daunting? Like, that does not at all sound fun or exciting, because you know how much work went into you just getting to where you are now. And I see women do this all the time when they're trying to improve their diet or they're trying to mend their relationship with exercise. They have a week off, maybe they have a month where they derail, and then they tell themselves the story that I got to start all over again. No, you don't. Health is a journey of self-discovery. And even in the moments that you're misaligned, which there's going to be a lot of them, by the way, that's where we learn the most often, right? We learn in the moments of misalignment. So you are not in any way starting over. And by telling yourself that you're starting from scratch is the very reason you're probably not going to get traction. The second thing I want to say is have compassion for yourself. What we are going through is unprecedented, right? Like in terms of our lifetime. Most of us have never experienced something like this. So it's new. And new things are very disorienting. It takes us some time to find our footing and get ourselves grounded. So be compassionate with yourself on that. I'll tell you the example I have that I think might make more sense of this is if you're driving somewhere new and you get lost, right? And let's say you're on a time crunch, like you're supposed to be somewhere at a certain time. Have you ever had that experience where it's like you cannot figure out how to get there because you're not thinking clearly, right? You're so frantic. You're caught up in being, this idea of being late and what people are going to think and what it's going to cost you, that you're not really solution-oriented. You're not really, you're kind of wasting time and you're not really absorbing information that will get you there in a straight line. I've had that experience so many times, less in the day probably of Siri, right? Siri's been a big help in helping us to navigate the roads. But I have been lost many times in my life, on foot, in a car, traveling in Europe, where I panicked and then I literally couldn't see straight. I couldn't even solve my own problem efficiently because I was so caught up in the emotion and the storytelling. And I think a lot of us are doing that right now. We're beating ourselves up about what it means that life got disrupted and that self-care looks different right now, and that we gave ourselves a few weeks where we were just kind of Netflixing and eating and maybe drinking more alcohol than usual. And now we're telling ourselves stories that we have to start all over again, which honestly is just preventing you from getting started. It's preventing you from being solution-oriented. So I want to remind you of this concept that I talk about all the time, structured flexibility, right? Structured flexibility is one of the greatest gifts you could give yourself, especially in times like this. So what is structured flexibility? Well, in the case of health, it insinuates that self-care does not always look the same, but that you can always administer self-care. But self-care might not always look like the perfectly planned food for the day or the boot camp class that you normally attend 5 days a week. Sometimes self-care looks like taking a deep breath. Or sometimes self-care looks like letting yourself sleep in for another hour. So the structure of structured flexibility is that you're committed to showing up for yourself and administering self-care in every scenario, but also recognizing that self-care doesn't always look the same. If you're not flexible with your approach, you are going to cause yourself a whole lot of unnecessary suffering. So times like this are a great time to remind yourself that, okay, it's not that I can't do anything to take care of myself, but I'm actually going to take better care of myself and do more for myself if I allow myself to be flexible and I allow it to look different. That is the invitation. All right, question number 4, the final question. This is a fascinating question. Why can I still not commit to change? So this person spoke to, listening to a lot of episodes of the podcast, signing up for courses, but still feeling like she can't get traction and wants to know how she can do that. So, of course, a lot of times, and my clients, I'm sure this drives them crazy, but I often answer questions with questions. And that's very intentional because I want to direct the answers back to my own clients. Because ladies, we are awesome at convincing ourselves that we don't know the answers. You totally know the answers. You just aren't asking yourself the questions in a way that help you to find them, right? So when you listen to a podcast, register for a course, print out materials, but don't actually do them, all of that to me speaks to passive action. And remember what passive action is. It's action that doesn't actually involve risk, specifically risk of failure. Passive action is very safe, and it looks like you're doing something, right? You signed up for a course, you're doing research, you're building a website, but you're not really doing anything that moves your life in a direction. And I specifically say a direction because by just doing something that is causing you to take meaningful action will either move you closer to where you want to be or further away from where you want to be. And both of those things are helpful to you. Because if you move further away from where you want to be, you've learned a little bit about what doesn't work. Awesome. So the next decision, hopefully you can move yourself a little bit closer. And of course, when we make decisions or take action that does move us closer to where we want to be, it just validates that, we should make more of those decisions. So you don't really learn about yourself. You don't really move your life by taking passive action. And we're awesome at taking passive action, reading books, consuming content, scrolling social media, listening to podcasts, all of those things. But that is not where magic happens. Magic happens in application, my friends. So what are you actually doing to prove to yourself that you are committed? And when I say, what are you actually doing? I'm specifically speaking to massive action. And massive action is not actually massive action. It's not big action. It's just action that counts. It's action that moves your life in a direction. It presents you with an opportunity to get to know yourself better. When I listen to a podcast, I don't learn about myself. I learn about ideas, but I don't actually learn about myself until I put rubber to the road and I try it on. And trying it on means that you're willing to suck at it. You're willing to make mistakes. You're willing to risk failure. You're willing to be a beginner. And oh my gosh, does that brings up a whole lot of uncomfortable emotion for people. And that is the very reason why most people don't do it. They're afraid of what they're going to feel. It's going to be uncomfortable, so I don't want to feel uncomfortable. Of course you don't, because your lizard brain is telling you it doesn't like discomfort. But we live again, this is, I know, kind of an ironic thing to say at the time of COVID, but we live in a very safe time, right? Our lives are pretty cushy for the most part. And so, honestly, the only way to elevate our lives is to get uncomfortable, to pursue failure, to be a beginner. But we don't want to do any of those things because we don't like how it makes us feel. And this is where I always remind people of the power of feeling emotion, right? What if you were willing to feel any emotion? How would that change your willingness to show up and take action? It's definitely something worth considering, right? So I want to give you some concrete examples between passive action and massive action. Passive action is signing up for a course. Massive action is actually doing the work that the course suggests. Passive action is buying new gym clothes. Massive action is actually going to the gym and working out, even if it's just for 5 minutes. Passive action is spending hours, days, weeks on your website. And passive action is putting yourself out there in some way that actually gets you to learn about where you need to put your energy in business. So you make sales calls. Maybe you do a Facebook Live. Maybe you actually go teach a class. But in my brain, there's really 2 reasons we don't take action. Number 1, we either have no plan or we have a faulty plan. If you have no plan for how you're going to act, you're not going to act. No way. Because you're asking your brain to work really hard. And remember, your brain doesn't like to work hard. Your lizard brain is like, nope, least amount of effort. We don't like to work hard. So you won't do it if you don't have a plan. And what I mean by a plan is specifically, what are you going to do and when are you going to do it? And you have a faulty plan when you set the bar too high, right? So you're not managing your expectations well. You're setting the bar too high. You're setting yourself up for failure. You're not managing your time and your energy. That's what I mean by a faulty plan. And if you have a faulty plan, which I have faulty plans all the time, truly, but I don't make it mean anything about me. I just remind myself, oh, I have a faulty plan. How could I reorganize myself to make a better plan? So I will actually show up and will follow through. The second reason I believe that we don't take action is we are not managing our thoughts and emotions, right? I've talked about this again so many times. Your thoughts drive emotion. Emotion is going to drive your behavior, and your behavior is going to create your results. So if you are not managing your thoughts and you are not allowing emotions in a healthy way, you're not going to take action. You're going to be paralyzed to take action. And this is, I would say, the crux of the work that I do with my clients. So I have a few tips here for an answer to this question. Number 1, focus on one thing. Commit to one thing. And apply the KISS method. What's the KISS method? Keep it stupid simple. So whatever it is that you're trying to commit to, break it down small enough that you can create an easy win for yourself. So maybe tomorrow you just commit to spending 5 or 10 minutes on an action that you've learned on a podcast or from a course that you signed up for. Just 5-10 minutes. And you're going to have a lot of stories to tell yourself that that's not enough. I'll never succeed with just 5 or 10 minutes. But hey, 5 or 10 minutes is a whole lot more time than doing nothing. So don't underestimate the power of small action steps. My second suggestion is attach it to something that you're already doing, right? So every morning, if you get up and have a cup of coffee, like that's a habit you already have, attach the new behavior to something you already are doing habitually. So I get up, I make my coffee, I sit down and drink my coffee, and I do this action step. I do this all the time, right? I always drink water in between clients. Often when I go to the bathroom, and then before I sit down back at my desk, I'll stretch. But whatever new behavior I'm trying to implement or whatever action I'm trying to take more consistently, it's easier for me to do if I attach it to something I'm already doing habitually, or because it's a trigger. That habitual behavior acts as a trigger for the new behavior. The other thing I would say is make it fun. If you are miserable the entire time you're doing the thing, you're not going to do it again. So if it's tomorrow, I'm going to stretch for 10 minutes. Awesome. How could you make that really enjoyable? Well, I could get my husband to do it with me, or I could play my favorite music, right? Or maybe we do something really fun as soon as it's over. I don't know what that is for you. But when we enjoy something, we are so much more likely to keep showing up for it. And of course, I'm going to say this, get to know your resistance. Because as soon as you come up with a plan, as soon as you decide on your one thing and you make the commitment for tomorrow, guess what's going to show up? Resistance. And you're going to come up with 10,000 reasons for why you don't want to show up. why you're not going to follow through. And that is a great time to pause and get to know your thinking. What am I thinking that's bringing up all this resistance? Oh, I've never liked exercise. I've never been athletic. I know this won't work. Well, those are all really helpful thoughts, aren't they? I'm being very sarcastic, obviously. They're not helpful thoughts. But when you can see that you're thinking that, it makes a lot of sense that you feel a lot of resistance. So how might you pivot your thinking to actually look forward to the thing, to actually follow through with the thing? That's your work, is to manage your head so you can show up to do the things on your heart. So that's it, my friends. Those are my 4 questions I am fielding for today. I hope it was helpful. I hope there was some good stuff in there for you that maybe just gave you, a different perspective. I do want to remind you, Confident Women Rising, the summit starts on Monday. It's going to be amazing. It's free. So you can head on over to Confident Women Rising to get registered for that. And the other thing I just want to say is those of you who are longtime listeners, and I know there's a lot of you because I hear from you all the time. I get emails, I get DMs, which I love. I love hearing from you. But there is nothing that you could do for me that supports me more than you, number 1, leaving me an iTunes review, right? So just write a few words about why you keep coming back to the podcast, the value that it's brought into your life. That is immensely helpful to me because people want to hear the experience of other listeners. I could talk about my podcast all day long, but it's my podcast. So people don't hear it in the same way when I speak about it. So if you would leave me a review, that is hugely helpful. And also just pass it along, right? Share it with your family and friends. Talk about it in your communities. Let women know that it's a resource available to them. Because I do think that this podcast, it is helpful for women. That's not just my opinion, but that is, that's what I'm hearing from people constantly. But I would love to have it on more ears. And one of the best ways for me to make that possible is to ask you to help me in that endeavor. So either leave a review or recommend it or do both. That would be like the best thing. I appreciate it immensely. I am so glad you were here today, and I will be back with you again next week. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.